Okay, hey, welcome to Coconut Productions. It's me and Colin in the garage again. And we're going to build a step stool for the missus. Right? We're going to start and we'll introduce the tools as we use them. The first tool we're going to use is our miter saw. This one happens to be just a simple sliding compound miter saw. And you could have one that doesn't slide. You could have one a bit smaller than this. But this is a 10-inch and it'll do the job just fine. It doesn't even have to be on a stand, it could be on the floor. And then for this project, we've got one 2x4, and you can see it's just an old scrap piece of 2x4 because we're going to be painting the project anyways. And one 2x6, we didn't have one, so we bought a 2x6. So we got to make sure these pieces of wood that are going to be your steps are the same in size. And you can measure 16, or you can do one and then measure off that same piece every time, and then you can make sure they're exactly the same size. Now, there's going to be a complete cut list at the end of this video. So if you're curious on what we're cutting and the sizes and whatnot, that'll be included at the end of the video. So because we need a little bit of overhang on the treads across the base, we're going to take a 1/4 inch off of one of the 2x6 base pieces and a 1/4 inch off one of the 2x4 base pieces. And you can see how I just lined out a full 1/4 inch. And just to show how you can do this, if you have smaller pieces like this, this is only it's only 13 inches, so my saw here can do just about a 13-inch cut because it's a slider. So I don't need a table saw to set up. I can just do a full cut on this and then turn it over and do the other side to get a nice rip cut. This is one of those measure twice, cut once rules. Once I got it all lined up, okay, so we needed to go over the cut list for the project here, and what we got for the project cut list is we've got our top. Our top is going to be made of two 16-inch 2x6s, and the one step at the bottom is going to be one 16-inch 2x4. And then we've got a 2x4 that's going to be our cross base on the legs, and that's going to be 15.5 inches because we wanted it to be about a 1/4 inch in on each side. The base is made up of 13-inch. So these two 2x6s are 13-inch. These two 2x6s are 13-inch. However, we, as you'll remember from the cuts on the saw, we took a 1/4 inch off each side just to pull it in about a 1/4 inch from the base so it has a little bit of a reveal. And then we got two 2x4s, and the 2x4s are for the first step, and they're 5 3/4 inch. And again, with the 2x4s, we took a 1/4 inch off, ripped it down the side, just to give a little bit more of a reveal on the end for the steps. Okay, so we're going to lay out the cross brace in that finished piece. You want to see that cross brace underneath? That keeps the step from wobbling side to side. And it's a little bit of a decorative piece, so we want to make sure it's lined up nice. So what we did for that is I measure up to the bottom of the first step, which is going to be about here. And then I measured a halfway point, which I lined up here. I put a halfway point on my 2x4. And then what I do is I take my 2x4 and I line it up. And really for me, this is just by eye. You got equal space, and you draw the lines out and make a box. There's my box there. So we got the box there, and if you notice, I put some X's just so I know what area out of that box I got to cut out. And we're going to notch this out. We're going to notch it out with a skill saw and a chisel. We'll quickly demonstrate how we're going to do that. but your 2x4 will sit in those notches and give you some strength in that box. Now it's important when you lay this out, what I like to do is my piece that I had ripped down the side where I took that 1/4 inch off, because it's got the sharper edges, I like to put that as the sandwich in the middle, so I don't have two round pieces sitting together. And you'll get less of a line, you'll get a bit of a tighter fit, and just to finish. Okay, so in the last shot you guys saw that we made some notches, lined out the notches. So basically all we're doing is we're getting the notches ready to cut out. So here's how we line everything up. I took the two pieces of 2x6 and I clamped them together. You can see that one of them we had taken a 1/4 inch off of, so you got to make sure that you make sure you count for that 1/4 inch, and I clamp both pieces together. You don't have to clamp them together, you could do one at a time, but I like doing both of them at once, and then they come out exactly equal. So when we drew the notches in, what I did was, as you can see, there's my X's, there's the notches, and I lined them over top of the edge so I can follow them down the edge. I took those lines, took my carpenter square, drew a line across, and then I took a simple knife, utility knife, and I scored it. And that way, when I go in and cut with the saw, it won't start chipping over. Just makes a better finish. I did the same thing on the other side. So now we gotta make the cross cuts to get the notches out. And here's the easiest way, rather than trying to chisel it out and this and that. Here's a nice easy way of doing it. Take your skill saw, lift up the guard, and then put the skill saw down on top. So the blade is now flat up against your piece of wood. I want a notch that comes to that depth right there. And rather than measuring it with a tape measure and maybe not getting it quite right, I loosen off the lift on my saw and I lift it. I lift it to the height I want. Careful and make sure that it's the height of the teeth and not just the bottom. I'm basically going to line up my 0 line, and I'm going to make a series of cross cuts. So to do the next step, you'll see that I've taken the pieces apart. It's easier to do it one at a time. And basically I want to get all this junk wood out of there. Easy way to do it. There we go. Knock them around with a hammer, and the majority of the wood comes out. Basically from here, I'll move in with a chisel, and I'll do my final depth, final finish with a chisel. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and take the notches down to the final depth. I got a nice wide chisel here, and basically for some of the chunkier pieces, you can just go ahead and get in there and start knocking them out and knocking them flat. So I've been working on the notches here. You can see we got them nice and smooth. And I had to fit it and try it a few times till I got it to the right depth and the right height and the right fit. So what I did is I just cut a piece of junk 2x4 so I don't have to use a long piece. We slot that in, put the other one on top. Now once we screw and glue and give that a bit of a sand, you're going to get a nice tight fit there. We did the first set of notches. I want to make sure the second set is exactly on the same spot. So when we line up that cross brace, it fits straight through. If you look at the top here, you might notice a little bit of a difference on the top. That's no big deal, right? That's less than 1/8 of a difference. That won't make a big deal. But what is important is I line up the bottom so that the stool on the bottom isn't uneven. Once I got that and the sides lined up, I've got my pieces where I shaved off a 1/4 inch on the same side, so all the notches and all the lines are lined up. Then I can go in and make sure you draw a few lines so you don't miss it. I line out my next notch, and that's going to be exactly where the first one is, so I don't have to worry about making sure the alignment is correct. Okay, so for the next part, we're going to actually start the assembly portion. And when we start assembling, I like to hide as many of the screws as I can. So they're harder to see and it just looks like it's put together and all well. So if you can, go out and buy this thing. It's called a Craig's pocket screw jig. Right, there's the bottom of it, says Craig on it, and it's like 20 bucks. It's a kit, and the kit will last you forever. To line up the jig, I went ahead and I drew lines of where each of my pocket screw holes will go. And I did that because I can take the opposite side and I'll put it across, and now using my carpenter square I can make sure that the holes are in the same position when I do both sides, right? That's just to make it look a little bit better when we put it together. So the holes you do see, they line up.
Now, was there other options if you didn't?
There is, right? You can just do screws on an angle. You can glue it. You can nail it. Any type of fastener that you have will do. I just find this kind of gets the finish a little better. And again, if you're doing the pocket screws, go on YouTube. There's like 50 million guys who've done how to use this thing properly and set it up. And you can just go to the website of the Craig's tool jig here, and they got lots of videos on how to use it. We're ready to do assembly now. And for the assembly, I cannot stress the importance of glue. It doesn't have to be Gorilla Glue. This is just the one that we got. You can get the regular carpenter's glue, whatever you want, some sort of glue. The glue is what holds everything together and tight. The nails just hold it until the glue dries. And then once the glue dries, it's good to go. You're not going to break it apart, okay? The wood will break, but the glue won't. So make sure you use glue, especially on things like stools and benches where they got a lot of wiggle and stuff going on, and you want them to stay together. So we're going to drop these pieces in there. And then I want to remember that I had left approximately a 1/4 inch on each side reveal. So I come in here and I'm going to make sure I got my 1/4 inch on the reveal. There we go. And that'll give you just a little bit outside, and really that's just for show to give it some character on the bottom rather than being flat. From here I'm going to drill a couple of screws in here to hold it steady. Now the nice thing about these screws I'm going to drill in is they're hidden and they're inside. So like I said before, I really don't want a lot of screws showing, and these screws, the initial ones I put in, are going to be hidden. I'm just using some construction screws, nothing fancy. They can be deck screws or anything else, but really this is an indoor stool, so I'm not too worried about weather and whatnot. So we're going to make more of the base and put it together. We have the bottom that we glued, and I added screws in there, right? Those screws are going to be hidden. So now we're going to add the next piece, and this is the one I put the pocket hole jig screws on. Basically, we're going to glue that over top and add the pocket hole jig screws into there. And this is going to be on the inside. So from the outside, you're going to see no mechanical fixtures holding it together. We take our pocket hole screw, nice long drill bit for it to go on there and into the pocket. Especially the first few, you want to make sure you don't cinch them up too tight too quick, or else you'll split something. The next part we're going to be putting on is, this is 2 steps, right? As you saw in the finished product, there's the small first step and then the second step. So we need risers for that small step, and we're going to be putting 2 of these on just the same way as we did the other pieces. They got the pocket hole jig screws here. We're going to glue them to make sure we got the strength for the glue, and then we're going to screw them in. If you notice here, we're putting a cross brace on, and what the cross brace is going to do is help straighten out some of these pieces, realign it, and then for the top, we won't have any screws in coming from the top down into the braces. We'll screw from the bottom up, and then you won't see any screws coming in through the top, so you won't have to worry about finishing those. So we're getting around to the end here. We're going to put the treads on, but the treads are going to be put on from the bottom there, so you don't see the screws and stuff on top, so we can finish it. Just wanted to make sure everything fits. We got good reveals and a little bit of overhang on the front and the back. And actually on this one, we're going to put the overhang all towards the front, so when you put it flat up against the wall, then it just sits flat. And you get a little bit of overhang here, a little bit of overhang here, and as well as the sides. And again, this is going to be painted, so all these little imperfections and stuff, they're going to disappear. So we're going to put in a couple of screws just on angles over here to catch the fronts of the treads, but I'm going to put them on the inside so they're less visible. Earlier on we talked about the pocket hole screws and they help hide. Here's a way of doing a pocket hole screw without the whole Craig's jig and all that. Put the screw in, take it up on an angle, and if I sink in it a little bit, I can sand that off and fill it in. Screw will disappear.
So we're just gonna shabby chic this, and the joy about shabby chicing is that it really doesn't need to be perfect because it's supposed to look old and vintage. So whatever you have around the house for sandpaper, if you want to use 120, which is what I'm going to use, that's great. We have a hand sander here that you can use if you need to finesse it, and the Big Daddy to save yourself time, a palm sander. So you're just gonna turn your palm sander on, and then you want to sand the edges first, areas where if there was to make friction it would rub off, and then you're just going to do a little bit on the surface just to make it look a little bit more antiqued, and go from there. So I've used a palm sander to do the majority of the work for me, and it really didn't take too much time at all. And then all you can do is, if you see any spots that were kind of tricky to get at, or you were interested in roughing up a little bit more but didn't want to take off the entire depth of the palm sander, you can just go in and you can just do it that way. So I'm actually pretty happy with how it looks right now, but if there was a little bit more detail that you wanted to do, then you just use your own ripped piece of paper and you go in that way, and you can detail it as much or as little as you like.